One of the reasons why I chose to talk about alchemy was because it's one of those things that our ancestors engaged themselves in, which is nowadays been belittled and slightened, shall we say, so that most people in, I think, the average population just believe that alchemy is to do with mad people trying to turn lead into gold. A, it's crazy to try, and B, you couldn't do it anyway. Well, as soon as you start looking into alchemy, you find out that there is so much more to it than that. I stumbled across one website when I put in alchemy archives into a search engine, and it took me to a place with hundreds and, well, thousands, tens of thousands of original alchemical documents and all manner of stuff covering, as far as I could see, more or less every single subject under the sun. So it's far more than turning base metals into gold. When push comes to shove, it's an ancient symbol for the perfectibility of the human spirit. It's about the fact that if we engage ourselves fully with the world around us, then the world around us becomes a better and more interesting place. And if we disengage ourselves from the world around us and cease to pay it attention and cease to pay it any interest, then things go so much the worse for us. So at the moment, it's a very key subject, because what we're trying to do, as we all know, I think, in this tent, is reach for the light. And what we feel is happening is that all the people around us are just becoming automata as they abandon the kind of principles that were being followed by the people that we're going to be hearing about tonight. The writings came to us, as we've heard, via ancient Greece from Egypt, and Egypt was probably at least sharing it with Babylon. It may have come from Sumer. One way or the other, alchemy is a subject that reaches out to us from prehistory right the way through, even through the Dark Ages, through to the Renaissance, and it touches us even here in what we might describe as a post-industrial world. The practice actually arrived in medieval Europe from Arabia, which is where it nestled. All of these critical subjects in the Hermetica, geometry, astrology, alchemy, all of them at one point or another have passed from one part of the world as they become victimized in other parts of the world. So they've constantly traveled through narrow channels to us, this ancient knowledge that people are trying to remember. Alchemy's been the subject of 100,000 books, so it's not a wonder you find so much stuff about it on the internet. And as usual, for every expert, there's an equal and opposite expert, so it is regarded as at once the mightiest secret ever possessed and the history of an error. So there's about as many people believing one thing as the other. And probably they're both right. We're going to be looking at some of the proponents of the great work. We're going to look at some of the symbols. Obviously, it's an overview. It's largely designed, this talk, to fire up an interest and hopefully encourage further research, because the more people there are involved in this, the faster humanity will move forward. History of the word is uncertain, but as we heard yesterday, I think from David Roll, one of the names that is attributed to it is Art of the Black Land. Alchemy, meaning the Black Land, which is named after, as we heard, the sacred part of Egypt, which is flooded by the Nile and became, as a result, very fertile, whilst the desert pressed on its borders from all around. So that's the official thing, alchemy, from the Black Land, meaning Egypt. I prefer the more legendary kind of, the more legendary explanation, which said that in ancient times a race of giants married spirits, and that the resulting offspring were exiled in the material world, and that these exiles taught the knowledge of their parents, which they retained, to all comers, whoever they were. And Tertullian described the output of these teachings as the teachings of fallen angels. Clement of Alexandria wrote of these people as teachers of masters of metallurgy and biology and magic and astrology. And it's said that these ancient teachings were originally written down in the form of books called Kema. And it may be that the knowledge we're looking at is named after them. However we look at alchemy today, it has always been a matter of the people who are in control of power and economies and information have always been interested in what alchemists are doing. This particular picture shows the Emperor Diocletian's soldiers victimizing Egyptian alchemists and doing something that happens so much over time, engaging in a bit of book burning. The Roman Empire was already in deep decline at this stage. They'd more or less given up. They'd robbed all the marble from the floor. Thank you very much, sir. This is alchemy. They'd more or less finished nicking all the marble off the ancient buildings in Rome, and they were nicking the buildings themselves. Diocletian was a big enough bastard basically to sit on top of the whole thing and start rebuilding it. There was a couple at the end that almost managed to rescue it. And one of the ways they did this is, you know, by disciplining their subject tribes and other people on the edges of the empire and trying to remove their culture, remove their knowledge, re-establish power. The Romans weren't the only ones. In 144 BC, a Chinese emperor forbade all alchemical practice throughout the whole of China. It obviously worked really well because about 44 AD, another Chinese emperor did pretty much the same thing. Henry IV tried to prohibit the production of alchemical gold, but Henry V encouraged it, and is perhaps somewhat cynically said that Henry V did that because he had soldiers in France, and you might as well undermine the currency if there's any way of doing that. So you could pay your soldiers in slightly dodgy gold. This is the way the kings and queens have always looked at it. They've been a bit of a problem. And this is an example of the kind of problem it is for your alchemists. The guy on the front here, we can see that he's got some kind of rib right through his hands. They've got ropes tied around his wrists. They've got something chopping through his leg. They're basically stretching him. This is a guy called Christian II, and he was, what was he? He was Elector of Saxony. And he's obviously somebody who, just like people nowadays, seems to think that torturing people is a good way of getting decent information. And he's surrounded by people who think that taking the king's shilling for inflicting a bit of pain is also worth putting bread on the table. This particular character seriously tortured another alchemist called Alexander Seton, who's one of many alchemists who are said to have performed the magical transformation into the Philosopher's Stone. The only thing that saved Alexander's life at the hand of this guy was the fact that he was worried that if he killed Alexander Seton, then the secret of this transmutation would die with him. So he didn't kill him, but he twisted his arm, something rotten. So not for nothing did the medieval sage Albert Magnus suggest to his fellow alchemists that they should avoid having anything to do with princes and noblemen. Just gets you into all sorts of trouble. Unfortunately, most of the people we're going to look at more or less ignored that advice. This is a picture of Roger Bacon. He's a Franciscan and he was a champion of the scientific method. It's important to understand that this was maybe 1200, I think, yes, late 1200s. This was the start of science in the sense that instead of just trying to understand the world with their minds and working out what the world must be like and concluding that it was so, science started pinning things down a little and said, well, hang on a moment, what happens if we count these 7 planets, if we have a good look and check that they're there? Because the idea was 7 holes in the body, 7 planets. Anybody who suggests there's an 8th planet, they're going to go, well, no, because there's only 7 holes in the body. Thing that Aristotle suggested. He had loads of good things, Aristotle. Loads and loads of really important stuff came from him. But at the same time, he was a slave, if you like, to the old system of just thinking about it with the head, or he hadn't put words and science to it. So he'd say that flies, say, had 4 legs. And somebody like Roger Bacon would actually pin a fly down and go, 1, 2, 3, 4, no, it's got 6. This is where they started encountering a bit of difficulty between the investigative spirit and the spirit of science such as it was that was established at the time of the Christian church. But this man, he was a recognised polymath and thinker and perhaps the first scientist. As such, he was quite clearly out there on the cutting edge. So most people simply thought he was a sorcerer and a wizard. As a result, he spent quite a lot of time in prison. His name has been associated with the original invention of the microscope, the pontoon bridge and the tank around 1300 AD. Not entirely surprising to me, I've been down to the British Museum and pictures of the friezes from the palaces in Nineveh from 3,500 BC, where I saw siege engines taking apart a city wall. And I thought, these ideas have been around for such a long time. But as people here have already said, we can just pull them out of the air around us if we're listening carefully enough. He was said to have gained much learning from the devil and to possess a mirror that could reveal far-off events. It was an obsidian mirror similar to the type in the British Museum that was held by John Dee, who was also said to have had truck with the devil and to be able to see distant events in time and space. This man was known as Dr. Mirabilis, wonderful teacher, and yet his fellow Franciscans were so convinced of his diabolic alliance that on his death they nailed all of his books to the shelves where they were found and they were left to rot.